On January 10, 2017, Dylann Roof stood still inside a federal courtroom as the judge prepared to deliver a sentence that would define the rest of his life. For the family sitting only a few feet away, this moment was meant to bring a sense of closure, a belief that justice had finally been served. But as the room fell silent and the words were spoken, something deeper lingered beneath the surface. A question that refused to go away. Can any punishment ever truly be enough? The next day, January 11, 2017, the sentence became official. Dylann Roof was condemned to death for the crimes he committed. Convicted in federal court, the outcome appeared final. Yet the events of 2015 and everything that has unfolded since continue to raise unsettling questions nearly a decade later. What drives a person towards such calculated violence? And what kind of justice can truly answer it? Before we explore where he is today and what his life looks like behind bars, we need to understand how this all began. On June 17, 2015, an ordinary evening gathering inside a historic church in Charleston, South Carolina, became the setting for an act that would shake the entire nation. The location was Mother Emanuel AME Church, a place deeply rooted in faith, history, and community. That night, a group of people had come together for Bible study, welcoming everyone who entered without suspicion. Among them was a young man who sat quietly, listening, observing, and waiting. For nearly an hour, nothing seemed out of place. Then, without warning, everything changed. He pulled out a firearm and began shooting at the very people who had accepted him into their circle. 9 individuals lost their lives in a matter of moments. 3 others survived, but the impact of what they witnessed would remain with them forever. This was not an act of randomness or confusion. Investigators would later present evidence showing that the attack was driven by a clear and deliberate motive rooted in racial hatred. The victims were targeted because of who they were. This was not just violence. This was intention. As authorities began piecing together the timeline, a more disturbing picture emerged. The attack had been planned well in advance. The individual responsible had legally obtained a weapon, spent time researching extremist beliefs, and even visited the church multiple times before carrying out the attack. This was preparation. This was calculation. This was a decision made long before that night. In the aftermath, the nation struggled to process not only the scale of the tragedy, but the mindset behind it. During the legal proceedings, statements made by the attacker revealed a complete absence of remorse. He did not express regret or hesitation. Instead, he justified his actions, claiming that he believed they were necessary. That lack of empathy became one of the most unsettling aspects of the entire case. On December 15, 2016, the verdict was delivered in federal court. He was found guilty on all counts, including multiple hate crime charges connected to the attack. The prosecution had constructed a case supported by overwhelming evidence, leaving little room for doubt. But even with a conviction secured, the legal process continued. In April 2017, after pleading guilty to state charges, he received additional sentences designed to ensure that he would never regain his freedom under any circumstance. This approach was described as a safeguard, a way to guarantee accountability regardless of future legal developments. However, the trial itself revealed details that raised further questions. At a critical stage, he chose to represent himself rather than rely entirely on his defense team. This decision was not driven by strategy, but by a refusal to allow any argument that he might be mentally ill. He rejected that possibility completely. This raised a difficult question. Why would someone risk their own life simply to avoid being perceived as mentally unstable? His personal writings offered some insight. He dismissed the field of psychology entirely, viewing it as deceptive and unnecessary. His beliefs were rigid, shaped by ideology rather than introspection. This mindset suggested a deeper layer to the case, one that extended beyond the crime itself. As the sentencing phase concluded and the courtroom proceedings came to an end, attention began to shift away from the trial and toward what would come next. The punishment had been decided. The system had delivered its verdict. But the story was far from over. Because what happens after justice is declared often raises questions just as complex as the crime itself. In April 2017, Shortly after the sentencing process was completed, he was transferred from local custody into the federal prison system. His destination was a high-security facility in Terre Haute, Indiana, a place specifically designated for individuals sentenced to death under federal law. This facility represents the final stage for those awaiting execution. It is a place defined by routine, restriction, and uncertainty. Life inside such an environment is structured in a way that limits almost every aspect of daily existence. Reports that later surfaced described conditions that were highly controlled. According to accounts, inmates in this setting often spend the majority of their time alone, with very limited interaction and strict regulations governing communication and movement. In letters that became public, he described his experience as isolating and restrictive. He claimed that he was confined for most of the day, with only brief periods outside his cell. He also alleged that he had been treated differently by staff, suggesting that he was singled out for harsher conditions. At one point, he initiated a hunger strike, stating that it was a response to what he believed was unfair treatment. He described difficulties in accessing legal resources and communicating with the outside world. These claims, however, were not fully confirmed by officials, who declined to provide detailed responses. This created a situation where much of the narrative relied on his own perspective. At the same time, there were incidents that suggested the environment was not entirely controlled. In one reported event, he was attacked by another inmate, raising questions about security within the facility. These developments added another layer of complexity to an already complicated case. But beyond the conditions of confinement, one element remained unchanged: his lack of remorse. Through letters and personal writings, he continued to express beliefs consistent with the motives behind his actions. There was no indication that time or isolation had altered his perspective. As the years passed, the legal process continued to move forward. Appeals were filed, each one challenging different aspects of the trial and sentencing. His legal team introduced arguments suggesting that errors had been made and that his mental state at the time of the trial had not been fully understood. In 2021, a significant appeal was presented, arguing that he had not been competent to represent himself during critical stages of the proceedings. The motion included extensive documentation, outlining possible psychological conditions and questioning whether the legal standards for competency had truly been met. Despite the depth of these arguments, the court ultimately rejected the appeal. The judges concluded that the original findings were valid and that the legal requirements had been satisfied. This decision reinforced the outcome of the trial, leaving the sentence unchanged. However, the process did not end there. Additional legal challenges have continued, keeping the case active within the judicial system. As of 2026, he remains on federal death row, awaiting the resolution of these ongoing proceedings. There is an important detail that often goes unnoticed. An execution cannot take place until every appeal has been fully exhausted. This means that individuals in this position may remain in this state for many years, sometimes decades, before a final outcome is reached. In December 2024, a major policy decision brought renewed attention to federal death row cases. A number of sentences were commuted to life imprisonment without parole. However, certain cases were excluded from this decision, particularly those involving acts of terrorism or hate-driven violence. His case fell into that category, and as a result, his sentence remained unchanged. This decision reflected how his actions continue to be viewed within the broader legal and political landscape. Even as perspectives on punishment evolve, some cases remain firmly outside those changes. And so, the situation remains unresolved in a practical sense. The sentence has been given. The legal process continues. Time moves forward, but the questions surrounding justice, accountability, and consequence remain as complex as ever. So now we come back to the same question that has followed this case from the very beginning. Can any punishment ever truly be enough for what Dylann Roof did? He took 9 lives. 9 people who were gathered in a place of faith, seeking peace, community, and understanding. 9 individuals who opened their doors to a stranger, only to have that trust shattered in the most violent way imaginable. Their names deserve to be remembered far more than his ever will, because this story is not about the man who committed the crime. It is about the lives that were taken and the families forever changed. Those who support the death penalty would argue that execution is the only form of justice that fits a crime of this magnitude. They would say that anything less fails to honor the lives lost. They point to the planning, the motive, and the complete absence of remorse as proof that rehabilitation is not possible. That mercy in a case like this is misplaced. But others see it differently. They ask whether taking another life truly restores anything that was lost, or whether it simply answers violence with more violence. That if he spends decades on death row, isolated, cut off from the world, living each day knowing what lies ahead, does that become its own form of punishment? A slow, prolonged consequence that forces reflection, whether he chooses to accept it or not. And then there are the families, some of whom chose forgiveness in the face of unimaginable loss. Does that forgiveness change anything about what justice should look like? Or does justice exist separately from personal healing? There is also the question of his mental state. If his beliefs were shaped by delusion, if he truly saw the world through a distorted lens, does that alter how we judge his actions? Or does the deliberate nature of what he did outweigh any explanation rooted in psychology? The courts have already given their answer. They determined that he was responsible, that he understood his actions, and that the sentence was justified. But legal answers do not always resolve moral questions. Today, he remains on death row. His appeals continue. The process moves forward, but it moves slowly. And while the system works through each step, the deeper question remains unresolved. What does justice actually look like in a case like this? Is it finality? Is it suffering? Is it accountability stretched over time? Or is it something else entirely? What do you think? Should the death penalty stand in a case like this? Does it deliver justice? Or does it fall short of something we cannot fully define? Is life without parole enough? Or is there no punishment that could ever truly match the weight of 9 lives taken? Because in the end, this is not just about one crime or one person. It is about the values we hold as a society. It is about how we define justice when faced with the worst kind of human behavior, and whether, even after everything, we can ever say that the balance has truly been restored.